Hello, so this is my special populations project, and I'm going to start talking, first of all, of my experience with the LGBTQIA community. For this one, I actually went to a drag show event with Emmy and Nitty, and it was a really awesome experience. Personally, I have a lot of gay friends in my friend group, and surprisingly, I've never been to one of these gay clubs before. So it was really awesome seeing the drag show performances because they definitely changed what I thought they would be like. There was a lot of not only trans people in drag and gay people in drag, but there were also gender non-conforming performances that were really artistically done. And it was also interesting to see the amount of straight people and gay people in the club. I thought it was going to be like only gay people or majority of gay people, but it was actually about 50-50. And they were truly really really supportive of every person that identified as straight or gay or whatever it might be. And it was really just a celebratory experience of gender and identity, no matter what you conform to, just celebrating that that is who you are and accepting other people. So that was a really awesome thing to see that night. And I really did like the performances. I actually have a couple of friends that do drag shows on the regular, and somehow I was not able to go until that night. So I'm really glad that I went and saw that and got to experience their world as well, just because I have not done that before, and it was an awesome time. And then I read an article. So the rest are going to be articles. In my first one, I read about first generation students. I read an article from greatschools.org. I'm looking at my notes right now, but the author was a associate professor of education at Wheelock College, and Wheelock College is actually pretty much first generation students. I think it's like 70%. Just because they really put a lot of their money and focus into that. But she does a lot of research on first generation students, and she talks a lot about their shift in identity and kind of their identity crisis, because first generation students are the first people in their family to go to college. They kind of have to um, cut themselves, not really cut themselves off from their family, but they feel like they're cutting themselves off from their family because they're the first ones to break the family system or disrupt the family system instead of taking over a family business or doing something that doesn't require 4 years of traditional college. Instead, they are paying for college and doing that 4 year experience, and it can be a struggle because they don't have a ton of support on their family to show them the ropes. So it was just talking about how a lot of those students kind of feel like they have to change their personality around their friends at school and also around their family, and how that can sometimes lead to them not feeling like they belong at school or at home, and how important it is that schools, 4 year colleges like ourselves, really need to have special programs in place to help these students find the resources that they need and connect with other first generation students that can really show them the ropes and help them along the process. So I think that was really cool to learn about. And then I read an article on students of color from the AmericanPress.org. This talked about how Black and Hispanic students are statistically shown to be less likely to graduate in 4 year colleges. And this really is because kind of the money barrier that is made between these minority groups. A lot of these groups live in low income communities, low income families. They're going to school in these communities that aren't being funded very well or very equally compared to other schools, which tends to lead to a lower quality education, and that can really impact their SAT scores and the knowledge that they bring, as well as the support into college, into a 4 year college, just because They might not have as much support as, someone like I do, who's had a lot of friends that obviously are going to school to go to college. That is their goal. And we just have more financial support and people to support us. And that can be a really big problem among that community. So the article also talks about how public institutions need to have these special programs for these groups for extra support so that they are given the same amount of tools or even more in order to graduate college, because their minority groups are really in the red when it comes to graduating, and a big part of that is just being given the tools and the support system to be able to graduate and get a job after college. And then I read an article about commuter students from InsideHigherEd.com. This was really interesting because this article really tackled the mental health issues that commuter students tend to experience. And this kind of reminded me of the first generation student article as well, just because it talks about how these students, again, feel the split between the communities in college and their community at home. So they feel like they kind of have to struggle and change for these two groups of people instead of being entirely in one or the other. And also just the travel aspect. If you're driving 30 minutes to school and back every single day, that can be really, really tiring and actually take a toll on your mental health, because you don't feel like you're grounded. You feel like you're always moving, you're on the move. This also impacts if they're living with their parents. It's hard to feel independent because they have to follow their parents' rules, but also they're trying to grow into their own person and find out what their needs and wants are without their parents interfering in that. And that can be a big factor into their mental health. A lot of these students also report a larger amount of depression and anxiety within these groups. And again, that's just because, they feel like they can't really be completely independent. And it is harder. It takes more of an effort to get to school. But a big misconception mentioned in this article is that students that are commuter students are actually very involved most of the time. And because their home is a little further away, it tends to actually be a big, what's the word I'm looking for? Having a brain fart. It's a big influence basically to get them even more involved so that they don't have to do nothing between classes and they actually have things going on throughout the rest of their day. And then I read an article about transfer students from New York Times, and it talks about how these students are currently getting the most attention than they ever have, really, just because schools are finally realizing that they have neglected these students, and these students can actually make up a lot of the revenue they lose from students that leave within their first 2 years. So that's been really awesome for both sides. But again, the biggest struggle with these students is transferring their credits. That tends to be a really big problem just because they typically lose an average of 37% of their credits from transferring, usually from community colleges to state colleges like UNL. And obviously, losing that amount of credits is also equal to losing money and time. So that can be really frustrating and usually is a big factor in these students choosing schools. If they can't transfer the majority of their credits, then that's going to really decide what school that they want to. If they can get more credits transferred at a different school, then obviously they are going to go with that. For international students, I read an article from abcnews.com. And this focused a lot on what's happening currently with the coronavirus. Obviously, these international students are either A, still living at college dorms and special programs that are going to help them through summer living, or B, they have moved back home and are looking into if they're even going to come back to the United States next year for school, or if they'll be doing online school or going to school back in their country, whatever it might be. And there are some statistics out there showing that colleges are really cutting their recruiting efforts for international students, especially when it comes to China. Obviously, the world is kind of chaotic right now, and no one really knows what's happening next year, but there's also a lot of fear in the air about these international students being rejected because of everything that is happening. They might not feel like they are a priority to other schools or that it's even possible for them to come back, especially with how future U.S. policy could definitely affect if these students could even be, brought back into our country. And that's kind of where a lot of worries lie currently. I read an article about students with disabilities from the NEA.org. Currently, there's about 2.8 million students with disabilities, and this number is actually consecutively rising each and every year. The article that I read was actually more of a biography from a student who had a disability. He had severe, I can't really say the word, I think it's palsy. Basically, his muscles wouldn't move normally, and he was also blind, so he was in a wheelchair, and he really was negatively and positively impacted by how other people, like his students, peers, and teachers saw him. I think the biggest thing I took away from this article is that these students really learn from a trial and error basis. They have to go through school and figure out what works for them best and what doesn't. And I think a lot of people, as well as myself, think that these students just go into school and they're told what they're supposed to do, right? Or they're just put into programs, but really, these students get an IEP or an individualized education plan. So again, with that trial and error basis, it's kind of different depending on each and every person. Just because someone suffers from maybe, let's say, autism, doesn't mean that their plan is exactly the same as someone else with autism. It kind of varies between person and person. And obviously, these students don't want to be treated any different because of their disability. They might need a little bit more help, but that's going to be on their own terms, and they really want to be seen as just another student in the classroom. And obviously, teacher and parent motivation is pretty crucial for these students just because their day-to-day lives are made harder by their disabilities, and having more motivation and support to get through each and every day and do their best is definitely going to be really helpful in helping them finish college or school or whatever it might be. The last article was from AmericanHonors.org for student veterans and students in military. And it just talks about how many of these students that go into the military are experiencing or looking for seeking out an experience for financial relief during college. That could be one possibility, or the other side of it is they really just want to be in the military. They're looking for that experience, they're looking for adventure, and so that is why they choose to be involved in that. Students going into this experience, it's kind of 50-50. From the article that I read, it seems like half of these students go into the military and they had no idea what to expect. They had no idea that it was going to be this rigorating and, physically and mentally straining. And the other half kind of expected it or was expecting to take on something more, and that was okay. But it seems like the majority of these students, no matter what, if they were expecting it or not, once they went into it, they were able to adjust and get used to it, and it was really a great way for them to learn discipline as well as many other things that typically people don't ever learn in their lifetime, which was pretty cool. A big misconception is that the military is a last resort option, when many students actually seek this out as an opportunity, like I said again. And I even had this misconception reading the article. I thought that many students did just take the military for financial support, which is a good reason, but it's definitely not the big reason. A lot of these students that go into the military are really seeking this experience and they want it. And college experience is very different from military, obviously. So a lot of these students who may have gone into the military their first 2 years out of high school and then go back to college, that's a huge, huge cultural shock. And it does take a little while for them to get used to that and, get, sorry, I gotta sneeze, get used to that culture and really settle down into college so that they can be successful and do well as well. So I think it went a little over time. Hopefully that's okay, but that is what I found for my student populations.